العلم قال الله قال رسوله قال الصحابة هم أولو العرفان. ما الدين نصبك للخلاف سفاهة بين الرسول وبين قول فلان.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ولي الأولين والآخرين، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. أيها الإخوة, in the previous lesson we went through some basic introductions to the sciences or the knowledge of al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah, and we spoke about the definition of al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah and some matters surrounding that. So before we continue with the lesson, firstly, the word qa'ida. The word qa'ida, what does it mean? Naam. Aslu shay'in wa asasuhu. Aslu shay'in wa asasuhu. Meaning the foundations of something, or the roots of something, or the principles of something. That is al-qa'ida. And we said linguistically, and just from the angle of fa'ida, qawaid can either be hissiyan or ma'nawiyan. Naam, meaning hissiyan or ma'nawiyan, Hassan? Either physical foundations, like the foundations of a house which are dug up, right? Or abstract. Now, for example, the Qawaid of our religion, the Usul of our religion, meaning al-Aqidah. So that is something which is ma'nawi, meaning it is something which is abstract. And then after this, the definition of al-fiqh. Now, who knows the definition of al-fiqh istilahan? Saleh. مكتسب. نعم، المكتسب من أدلتها التفصيلية. المكتسب من أدلتها التفصيلية. So it is knowledge regarding the ahkam of the Sharee'ah al-amaliyah, the action-based ahkam deduced from the specific evidences. And what are the 5 ahkam of the Sharee'ah, Rayyan? Wajib, mubah, makruh, mustahab, and haram. Nah. But usually when they say it in order. So wajib, the most important, then mustahab, then mubah, then makruh, and then haram. Or they say it in opposites, meaning wajib and haram, opposites. Mustahab, makruh, opposite. And then mubah. After this, the definition of al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah as a term, the definition of al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. Do you know this me? Remember? تفضل. أحسنت, well done. حكم أغلبي أو حكم كلي فقهي ينطبق على جزئيات عديدة من أبواب مختلفة. So a قاعدة فقهية is an underlying fiqh-based principle which dictates various subsidiary rulings in most instances in various areas of fiqh. Naam, in various areas of fiqh. And why do some of the ulama say حكم أغلبي and not حكم كلي? Some of them. Naam. Because there are always certain exceptions. And why is al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah important? Or what is the role of al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah? Because one qa'ida fiqhiyya will dictate 100 different masail. من أبواب مختلفة, like we mentioned previously. الشاطبي رحمه الله in الموافقات كتاب الاجتهاد, he said إن الشريعة لم تنص على حكم كل جزء على حدتها, وإنما أتت بأمور كلية وعبارات مطلقة تتناول أعدادا لا تنحصر. الشاطبي in الموافقات كتاب الاجتهاد, he said that the Sharee'ah did not come and pinpoint every single hukum of every mas'ala with an evidence. Rather, the Sharee'ah came with umur kulliyah, a general framework, general guidelines, wa ibaratun mutlaqa, and sentences or phrases or principles which are far-reaching. تتناول أعدادا لا تنحصر, and they apply to many individual issues which cannot be enumerated. So this was the role of the Sharee'ah. The Sharee'ah came with a general framework. Some of it has been detailed. Of course, if a person says, but did Allah subhanahu not describe the Qur'an tibyaana likulli shay, as a clarification for every single matter? It clarifies every matter through its general framework, through its principles. So through the principles of fiqh, everything has been clarified until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Everything which we require, every type of good and every type of harm which we fear, all of it has been clarified and pinpointed through the general framework and the principles of the Sharee'ah. And when it comes to fiqh, most of them are found in al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. After this, al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah, where are they taken from? And when the ulama, when they mention a qaida fiqhiyya, where is it taken from? No. So there's two types of qawaid. There are qawaid which are taken from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. نعم. And of course, لا تحتمل الخطأ. There's no error in them, of course. And then there are other qawaid which are taken from the words of the ulama. When we say that the qawaid are taken from the Qur'an and the Sunnah, even there are two types. Now, I didn't mention this last time. So when we say that the qawaid, some of the qawaid al-fiqhiyya are taken from the Qur'an and the Sunnah, either bin nas, meaning either there is a clear ayah or a clear hadith which directly proves the qaida, bin nas. Like for example, al-amalu bin niyat. Like for example, la darara wa la dirar. These are words of hadith. So al-a'malu bin niyat, they took from that the principle al-umuru bi maqasidiha. Actions are according to their maqasid, the intended objectives. And la darar wa la dirar, there is no initiating harm, neither is there reciprocating haram. It is taken directly from the hadith, la darara wa la dirar. So the point is there are certain qawaid and they are directly from a hadith or an ayah. Then there are other qawaid which are taken from the Sharee'ah, bil istiqraء wa tatabbu' al-furu'. Bil istiqraء wa tatabbu' al-furu'. Meaning that the ulama, they looked at the rulings of, for example, 10 different masail. They looked at the Islamic ruling of 10 different masail. When they looked at the rulings of 10 different masail, they realized that all these 10, 15 different masail, there's a principle which applies to all these masail. And therefore they produced or deduced a qaida fiqhiyyah. So it is still taken from the Sharee'ah. It is still taken from the Sharee'ah. So for example, the ulama, the fuqaha, they looked at instances where when a person fi madhannatil mashaqqa is in a situation where normally there will be a difficulty, the Sharee'ah brings an ease and an allowance. Like combining the salah, like extending the limits for masah al-khuffayn, like for example not having to do fast sawm, etc. and we said combining the salah, shortening the salah, etc. And therefore they realize, okay, there's a principle here. Al-mashaqqa tajlib at-taysir. That when there are cases of difficulty, an ease is brought in the Sharee'ah. So like this. Sorry. بالاستقراء. Okay. الاستقراء والتتبع. الاستقراء والتتبع is a method of deducing rulings, and it is when the ulama, they look at the Sharia as a whole, and they look at the various masail and the various ayat, and thereby they're able to deduce types or categories. For example, طيب, as an example, we just said that there are 5 rulings of the Sharia: haram, wajib, mubah, mustahab, and makruh. Where's that come from? Meaning we don't have a direct hadith in which the Prophet said the rulings of the Sharia are 5. The ulama, bil-istiqra' wa tatabbu', they looked at the rulings of the Sharia, they found certain rulings, certain masail are wajib, other masail are haram, other masail are makruh, others are mustahab, others are halal, jaiz or mubah. And therefore, bil-istiqra' wa tatabbu', they found that generally speaking the rulings of the Sharia are 5. Naam, like this. And in most cases, as a fa'idah, in most cases, if you find something being categorized or numbers being put to something, in most cases, it is by way of al-istiqra' wa tatabbu'. In most cases, not all cases. For example, Arkanul Iman sit. No, that's hadith, clear mansoos. Arkanul Islam khams. There's a clear hadith there. But for example, even shirkun akbar or shirkun asghar or shirkun khafi, there are hadith there. But there are other categories for example, the categories of tawheed. If somebody said to you, where is the evidence for the 3 categories of tawheed, al-rububiyyah, al-uluhiyyah, wal-asma wa sifat? Which ayah mentions that there is a tawheed known as tawheed al-rububiyyah and uluhiyyah al-asma wa sifat? There isn't a direct ayah or hadith, but we know by way of al-istiqra' wa tatabbu'. Meaning the ulama, they looked at tawheed as a whole. They looked at all of the ayat pertaining to tawheed, and they find that we can generally categorize the ayat of tawheed into 3. Some of those ayat speak about the rububiyyah of Allah. Some of those ayat, they speak about the uluhiyyah of Allah. And some of those ayat, they speak about al-asma wa sifat. And therefore, tawheed is 3 types. Naam. So this is known as al-istiqra' wa tatabbu'. So that is the first type of qawaid taken from the kitab of the sunnah, or by looking at the various furu' and masail and categorizing them through at-tatabbu' wal-istiqra', al-istiqra' wa tatabbu'. Then we mentioned, and this was homework, that there are, from another angle, there are 2 types of qawaid. There are certain qawaid which apply to almost all areas of fiqh, almost, taqriban. And there are 5 which the ulama have agreed upon, and they are known as al-Qawaid al-Khams al-Kubra, or al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah al-Kubra, the 5 major Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. Naam. So, first of all, who got the one that was missing? Just put your hands up if you did the homework. And 1, 2, 3. You did the homework? Go on, what was the 5th one? Well done, mashallah. In Arabic? Now, who knows in Arabic? Now? Again? Ahsant. Al-Aada muhakkama. Al-Aada muhakkama. What's your translation? What do you say customs are?
Custom is the basis of
Well done. And did anybody have any other wording for al-Aada muhakkama? Sometimes the fuqaha use a different wording. Not in Arabic. Not in Arabic, Yeah, instead of saying al-Aada muhakkama, there's sometimes another word which is used. Al-Aada mu'tabara. Either muhakkama or mu'tabara. Same, meaning the customs of the people applies. When it comes to Sharia rulings and specifying certain Sharia rulings, Aada mu'tabara. It is taken into account. The customs of the people are taken into account. Ala kulli hal, al-Qawaid al-Khams al-Kubra, what are they? First one. Al-Umur bi-maqasidiha. al-umur bimaqasidiha, meaning actions or matters are according to their intended objectives. Secondly, al-yaqeen la yazulu bish-shak, meaning an instance of certainty is not removed due to mere doubt. Third, al-mashaqqa tajlib at-taysir, that cases of difficulty brings about an ease or an allowance. Fourth, ad-darar yuzal, or ad-darar la darar wala dirar, ad-darar yuzal, or and we will come to this, jalb al-masalih wa daf' al-mudar, and it's all the same qaida, meaning that harms have to be prevented or repelled. Harms have to be removed. And then the fifth one we said, العادة محكمة or العادة معتبرة, meaning the customs of the people are taken into account. Now, طيب, there's a question that's been asked, and we might as well cover this now. What is the difference between القواعد الفقهية and أصول الفقه and الضوابط الفقهية? What is the difference between القواعد الفقهية and أصول الفقه and الضوابط الفقهية? Or we could say, what is the difference between القواعد الفقهية and القواعد الأصولية? Because the word القواعد الأصولية, the fuqaha use it to refer to أصول الفقه. Now sometimes they say أصول الفقه, sometimes they say القواعد الأصولية. It means the same thing. So we have three. We have القواعد الفقهية, and we have أصول الفقه or القواعد الأصولية, and we have الضوابط الفقهية. Firstly, القواعد الفقهية, the subject of القواعد الفقهية is مسائل الفقه. The subject of القواعد الفقهية is مسائل الفقه, meaning principles, rules, like we said, which dictate and govern various masail of fiqh. As for usul al-fiqh, the subject matter of usul al-fiqh is evidences and shar'i wordings. So they say that al-qawaid al-fiqhiyya tabhathu fi masail al-fiqh. Al-qawaid al-fiqhiyya, the subject matter is the individual issues of fiqh. أصول الفقه تبحث في الأدلة والألفاظ الشرعية. As for أصول الفقه, its subject matter is the adillah of the sharia, ayat and ahadith, and the alfaz of the sharia. So for example, in أصول الفقه, you don't study masail of fiqh, you study evidences, i.e., how do we know that an amr in the command in the Qur'an, a commandment in the Qur'an, an amr, an ayah which has a commandment, an amr, is it for wujub, or is it for istihbab, or is it for ibaha, or is it for irshad? How do we know? Notice, you're not talking about any issue of fiqh here. You're not talking about a mas'ala. You're talking about how to understand the evidence. Meaning, in the Qur'an, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ, the form of the ayah is amr. It's a command. However, does this command mean wujub, or does it mean istihbab, or does it mean ibaha, or does it mean irshad? Okay, same form, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Go travel the lands and go see how what the ending was for the mukaththibin. It's the same command, fasiru wa aqimu. In the Arabic language, it's the same command. However, how do we know whether this is an obligation or an encouragement, or is it something which is mubah, or is it something which is irshad? How do we know? So, usul al-fiqh, its subject matter is evidences, not masail. Whereas qawaid al-fiqhiyya, it researches masail directly. And so when the ulama say usulul fiqh, meaning adillatul fiqh, because one of the meanings of usul is adillah. So here usulul fiqh, it means adillatul fiqh. And that's why when they, when the usuliyin, when they give the ta'rif of usulul fiqh, they say ilmun yabhathu fi adillatil fiqh wa kayfiyatil istifadati minha wa hal al-mufti wal mustafti. And they say usulul fiqh, it is ilm, it is a science, yabhathu fi adillatil fiqh. Its subject matter are the evidences of fiqh, not masail al-fiqh. And even when they say fiqh, it's not always restricted to fiqh only. Now, generally the evidences of the Qur'an. So it can be applied to even, it can even be applied to, for example, Aqidah. It could even be applied to al-Aqidah. So that's the first difference. The second difference is that usul al-fiqh, there are other subject matters within usul fiqh which are not found in al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. For example, mabahith al-ijtihad, والتقليد وآداب المفتي وآداب المستفتي والنسخ والمنسوخ, etc. So in usul al-fiqh, we study the issue of ijtihad and the conditions of ijtihad. And we study at-taqlid and the conditions of at-taqlid. And we study آداب المفتي والمستفتي, the etiquette of the one who is asking questions and giving answers. And we study an-naskh wal-mansukh, the rules of abrogation and the rules of qiyas, etc. So these are additional topics within usul al-fiqh which are not found in al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. Also from the differences between al-Qawaid al-Fiqh and usul al-Fiqh is that when it comes to the usul al-Fiqh, first the principle is established and then rulings can be based upon that principle. First, the principle is established, and then rulings can be based upon that principle. Now, for example, the rule is that whenever the word kull is found in the Sharee'ah, whenever the word kullu is found in the Sharee'ah, then this lafz shar'i, kullu, yufid al-umum. It is generality. Now, kullu, every, meaning every instance within that. Therefore, the ruling is, and now you've taken the ruling. So the principle came first based upon a dalil, and now you come out with rulings. Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah is opposite. The masail have come first, and then based upon those masail, al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah have been deduced. Naam? So, usul al-fiqh, the principle comes first, and then after that, we can start applying it to masail. Al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah, the masail came first. And then based upon those masail, through, like we said, al-istiqraء والتتبع, Qawaid were formed. That's another difference. Also, the ulama mention that from usul al-fiqh, you cannot implement usul al-fiqh directly upon a mas'ala. Why? Because it requires an evidence. Because usul al-fiqh is principles regarding understanding evidences, not understanding masail, understanding general evidences. Whereas al-Qawaid al-fiqh can be used directly to dictate a particular mas'ala. It can be used directly to... So for example, if somebody said to you, do I require a niyyah for salah? Do I require niyyah for ghusl? Do I require a niyyah for sadaqah? Do I require a niyyah for al-ghusl, for wudu, for tayammum? For every single one of them, you say yes, because al-umur bi maqasidiha. Yes, because al-a'malu bin niyyah. So you can utilize a qa'ida fiqhiyya as an evidence, or if we be even more accurate, as a justification for the hukm of a mas'ala. As for usul fiqh, that usul fiqh will not make sense without there being a dalil present. Now you have to mention a dalil because usul fiqh, it studies the dalil, not the mas'ala. Now I hope that's clear. And then as for الضوابط الفقهية, because it's good to know these terms. Now maybe not now, but in the future you'll come across these terms. As you study more, inshallah, you'll come across these terms. As for الضوابط الفقهية, الشيخ Abu Muhammad al-Khawlani, from the students of Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah, he mentions in his sharh that the ulama of old, the mutaqaddimin, they didn't used to differentiate between al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah and al-Dawabit al-Fiqhiyyah. I mean, they would use both of these terms interchangeably. Sometimes they would say al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah and sometimes they would say al-Dawabit al-Fiqhiyyah. However, presently, they differentiate between them, that al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah, we said, حكم أغلبي في جزئيات عديدة. Now, the Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah applies to many different masail in various areas of fiqh. As for al-Dawabit al-Fiqhi or Dawabit al-Fiqhiyyah, then it applies to one bab min abwab al-fiqh or a certain subject of fiqh. It doesn't apply across the board through various subtopics of fiqh. For example, in al-Dawabit al-Fiqhiyyah, there is a principle, ما جاز في الصلوات الفريضة جائز في النفل. ما جاز في الصلوات الفريضة جائز في النفل. That which is permitted in the fara'id is also permitted in the nawafil. That is specific to salah, and salah only. Of course, there's exceptions. That is specific to only the chapter of salah. It doesn't affect Sawm, it doesn't affect Hajj, it doesn't affect, but al-umur bi maqasidiha, it affects so many different, dictates so many different masail across the board. So this is the main difference. That al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah ينطبق على جزئيات عديدة من أبواب مختلفة. As for الضوابط الفقهية, then it applies to a particular topic within fiqh, like only salah. نعم. Or for example, al-hudud tudra bi-shubuhat. This applies only to hudud, etc. So that is some of the differences between al-Qawaid al-Usuliyya wal-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya and al-Dawabit al-Fiqhiyya. After this, what we're going to be studying is the manzuma, the poetry. So this manzuma, it contains 49 verses of poetry. This manzuma, this poetry contains 49 verses. And these 49 verses, they contain 33 different qawaid. These 49 verses, they contain 33 qawaid. And that's because some of the abiyat are an introduction. 12 abiyat, and 12 verses are an introduction by Alhamd and As-Salah ala Nabi, etc. And then there are 2 verses at the end which are a khatima. And the other abiyat, they contain qawaid. And so the ulama mentioned that the 49 verses in total, they contain 33 qawaid ijmalan. And 50 qawaid, because sometimes from one qaida you may be able to deduce another qaida. So it's 49 verses, 33 qawaid ijmalan, and 50 qaida ala wajhi tafsili wa tafriq, or more. And as a side point, the author himself, Sheikh Abdalrahman bin Naaser al-Sa'di rahimahullah, he himself has an explanation, a sharh of his manzuma. Naam. And it is called Sharh al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah by al-Sa'di. Naam. And it's just ta'liqat. Anybody wants to have look at the book, he can look afterwards. It's his own ta'liqat upon the manzuma. And in its introduction, he mentions, أما بعد فإني وضعت لي ولإخواني منظومة مشتملة على أمهات قواعد الدين وهي وإن كانت قليلة الألفاظ فهي كثيرة المعاني لمن تأملها ولكنها تحتاج إلى تعليق يوضحها. He said, after as-salah upon the Prophet and alhamd and bismillah, he said, I have written down a manzuma for myself and my brothers. And this manzuma, this poetry, it contains ummuhatu qawaid ad-din, the most fundamental qawaid of the religion. And despite this manzuma being qalilatul alfadh, very short, few words, however it is kathiratul ma'ani, it has many meanings. However, it requires some notes and some commentary to explain them. And so, فوضعت عليها هذا الشرح اللطيف تيسيرا لفهمها. And so, I have written this light explanation or commentary to make it easy to understand, etc. And it's mentioned that the author, he wrote the sharh of the poetry when he was 23 years old. He wrote the sharh when he was 23 years old. And so he wrote the poetry much earlier. And also as a side benefit, the author has 2 other books on al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. I should have brought them with me, maybe, perhaps I'll bring them next week. He has 2 other books on al-Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah which are more detailed. One of them, اختصار قواعد ابن رجب. قواعد ابن رجب, which is 3 or 4 volumes depending on the print. السعدي rahimahullah came along and he summarized the Qawaid from Qawaid ibn Rajab, and he called it اختصار قواعد ibn Rajab. And then the second book, it is القواعد والأصول الجامعة والفروق والتقاسيم البديعة النافعة, and that contains about 60 or more Qawaid from Qawaid al-Fiqhiyyah. Like I said, but they've written books, prose, it is not poetry. And then after this, and the last thing which remains is to speak about the author. Because I said previously that always the right of our teacher upon the students, and we are sitting as his students, rahimahullah, is that we know something about him, and we make dua for him, and we make dua of rahmah upon him. So he is a Shaykh al-Allama, Faqih al-Qasim, Abdulrahman ibn Nasr ibn Abdullah ibn Nasr al-Sa'di. He is Abdulrahman ibn Nasr ibn Abdullah ibn Nasr al-Sa'di. In short, Abdulrahman ibn Nasr al-Sa'di. And you can say al-Sa'di with a kasra on the sin or al-Sa'di on the fatha on the sin, either way. Ibn Nasr al-Sa'di or Ibn Nasr al-Sa'di. And he was born 1307 Hijri. He was born 1307 Hijri, which corresponds to 1889 from the Gregorian calendar. 1889. So 2024 now, 1889. So what is it, 130 odd years? And his father passed away when he was young. He memorized Qur'an before he reached 11 years old. And then he began to seek knowledge with the ulama of his area. And when he was 23 years old, he began to teach and write. When he was that young, he was recognized by his peers for his knowledge, and so he began to teach and write. And he passed away 1376 Hijri when he was 69 years old, rahimahullah rahmatan wasi'ah. And he was born and he lived and he was buried in Al-Qasim, in Unayza in Al-Qasim. And he had many ulama. The most famous amongst them, famous to us, are 2. Firstly, Al-Shaykh al-Faqih Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymin rahimahullah rahmatan wasi'ah. And secondly, Shaykh Abdullah al-Bassam. Shaykh Abdullah al-Bassam, who wrote Tawdih al-Ahkam Sharh Bulugh al-Maram. And I say that if a Shaykh al-Sa'di left behind nothing except that he produced Ibn Uthaymin by the permission of Allah, then that is sufficient as a virtue. It's sufficient as a virtue that he left behind Ibn Uthaymin, who then assumed his position in teaching. And as for his books and his rasail, they are many. And they have been collected in the Majmu' Rasail of السعدي, and they cover various sciences from refuting ilhad and refutations like his Rad on al-Qasimi, to fiqh, to Hanbali fiqh, to al-Qawaid and usul and aqidah and mahasin al-Islam, speaking about the virtues of Islam, and to raqa'iq like his book, what's the book called? Al-Wasail al-Mufida ila al-Hayat al-Sa'ida, and many other books like this, and of course his tafsir, which is well known. Now, with regards to the dars, we want to try to memorize these 49 verses of poetry, and they are from the easiest types of poetry which you could memorize, believe me. And the easiest way to do it is just memorize 2 lines. Now, 2 lines or 2 verses for every lesson, just memorize 2 verses, and it'll be memorized in no time. If a person cannot memorize the manzuma itself, then at the least you have to memorize the qaida. At the least you have to memorize the qaida. So you have in your mind 30 qawaid al-fiqhiyyah in Arabic. But it's easy to memorize the qaida and help each other as well. So before the lesson or after the lesson, recite to each other just 2 verses of poetry, and by the permission of Allah you'll be able to easily memorize them, inshallah.